One of the biggest challenges facing a reader is being diagnosed with dyslexia. But does that mean that they will forever be unable to enjoy a good story? Well, today, our guest will talk about the challenges of dyslexia, as well as how she went from being a recovering criminal defense attorney to a thriving novelist. Find out how on today's episode of the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. Welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My guest today is Reyna Gentin, and she's the author of 2 legal thrillers as well as a young adult novel dealing with dyslexia. The book is called My Name is Layla, and it tells the story of 13-year-old Layla who feels certain she's capable of more, but each time she tries to read or write, the words on the page dance and spin, changing partners and leaving her to sit on the sidelines. So here to dance and spin with us is Reyna Gentin. Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey.
Thanks so much for having me, Art.
Yep, you're welcome. The book I read of yours is My Name is Layla, and so a little bit later we're going to talk about that one. It was a really lovely young adult novel, and I can't wait to get that into my daughter's hands. She's 13 years old, so that's I think that's about the right age group for her. So thank you. Anyway, we're going to talk about that, about your journey to becoming a writer. But to get things started, let's get to know you a little bit. I'd love to ask people, what's your favorite book?
So, as you can imagine, I get that question a lot. And I have to admit, I'm one of those people that I'm a little bit, love the one you're with. I enjoy books so much. I read a lot. I read very slowly, so I don't get through nearly as many books as I'd like to. I saw you're doing some kind of 30 book thing. That would kill me. So I don't try for anything like that. And often I get very involved and excited about whatever I'm reading. And then afterwards, if you ask me too many specific questions about it, I can't actually tell you. So I try not to answer the favorite book question because it feels like I would be, fraudulently saying something. So
Sure. Yeah, that's understandable. Well, have you been reading anything recently that you've enjoyed then?
Yeah, I'm reading a book now called The Hare with Amber Eyes. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's a great book. I almost always read fiction. So every now and then to read some nonfiction is very exciting for me. And this is a book about a very prominent family in France and in Austria at the turn of the 20th century and what happened to them. And they're a banking family, but they're also kind of an art family. They're very interested in art. So collectors. It's a wonderfully written book and just really gets into the personalities of the different generations and what happens to them.
So do you like a certain genre, like historical fiction or just whatever catches your fancy?
I read a lot of contemporary fiction. I don't read that much historical fiction. Now that I'm kind of in this mode of learning how to be a member of a writing community, I try to be supportive. So I end up reading a lot of books by people that I've met or people that move in the same kind of writing circles that I'm in. So that's been great. And that's mostly, I would say, contemporary fiction.
Cool. Yeah, I like a wide range. And like you mentioned, I gave myself a big reading challenge this month. The trick is audiobooks.
Yeah.
And I've been getting out and walking more, and then I've been working on a giant 1,000-piece puzzle so I can listen to the audiobook while I'm working on the puzzle. And
wow, yeah. That's a lot of multitasking. I'm not really sure I'm capable of that.
Okay. Yeah. That's just the way my brain works, I guess. So that works for me. And I obviously no, that doesn't work for everyone, and that's fine. It's just something fun I thought I'd try. So, but it's been doing what I've hoped, which is to get me outside more and exercising more. Great. So yeah, thinking about your journey as a writer, I suppose we should start at the beginning, as all good stories do. What, I guess, initially drew you into to pursue a law career? Because that's how you got your start, was as a lawyer. How did?
Yeah, for sure. So I meet with a lot of law students now, and I find that they have pretty strategic goals in mind when they go into law school and they decide on what kind of practice they're going to have. I had no such strategic goals. I really didn't know any lawyers. I had no lawyers in my family. For me, it was much more that I was a good humanities student and not a good science and math student, and that I needed to find something to do to make a living. So that was really how I ended up in law school. But once I got there, I really found out pretty quickly that I like to work more individually with people, not to do large commercial kind of work, but really to kind of feel like I was, even if I wasn't exactly sitting across the table from somebody, but more in that mode. So I went into more public service areas.
So you were a defense attorney then, and what, I guess I know it's kind of a broad question, but what was that like? I sometimes see people portray defense attorneys as the bad guy because you're getting criminals off, but I know that's not always the case.
Yeah.
That a lot of times you're defending people and making sure they have a fair trial. But what was that experience like for you?
Yes, I mean, certainly that's the way I prefer to think about it, that it's really upholding the Constitution and the system that we have in this country so that people who are accused of crimes do get a fair trial and a fair shake. I was doing criminal appeals, which is a little bit different. It's on a kind of a different level. They had the people that I was representing had already been convicted of the crimes, and we were looking to see whether they had gotten a fair shot at trial, whether they needed to either have a do-over, or if their case wasn't proven against them, that they needed to be released. So I would say, out of all the cases I had, I don't think I actually had any where somebody got outright released. It really just doesn't happen that much. And it doesn't happen if the system is working. And I think generally the system works. I know that's not a very, in some ways, not a politically correct thing to say these days. And I get that. And I certainly think that there are huge issues with, minorities and the arrest rates and all things like that. But I think generally the legal system itself, I think it works. And so, often we would get people a new trial because something had happened that was unfair at their trial. So, I really enjoyed it. It was a very kind of academic practice. It was quiet. It was, I wasn't racing to court. I didn't have a million deadlines. I was able to also raise a family at the same time. And it was really a compelling, interesting way to practice law.
Yeah. So it wasn't quite like, the television shows or anything, where you're having the dramatic race to the courthouse and all that.
Well, not on the appeals level anyway. Probably sure. Not. So.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And I think, and I agree, the system works when it's used properly and not abused. And it's admirable that, to be involved with that and to make sure, I want to make sure that I'm doing my part to make this system work, because it does.
Right.
When it's, like used properly and fairly as it should be, you eventually progress to decide, hey, I want to write a story or a book. How did you get to that change in your career?
Yeah. So I would say that I was practicing for quite a while. I was doing criminal appeals for almost 18 years. And it's, as you can imagine, it's the kind of practice that does kind of lead to a certain level of burnout after a time. I mean, the cases themselves are very difficult. The facts of the cases, when you're reading them and dealing with them, are painful and difficult to deal with. So I kind of hit a point where I just felt like I wasn't telling the stories in the way that they needed to be told. And a lot of writing appeals is telling a story. I mean, obviously you need a legal issue. You need to have something that you're basing your story on, but a lot of it is figuring out how to frame the case in a way that somebody will look at it and say, maybe this man or woman deserves a second chance. And when you start to get a little burnt out from that gets more and more difficult to do. So I decided in 2014, actually, to call it quits. And, for me, that was good. I was in a position, luckily, where I didn't have to get a new job kind of right out of there. I could quit and think about what I wanted to do with myself, which, I know is a luxury a lot of people don't have, but I did. And then, the writing kind of came from there. It was kind of a crazy story. A friend of mine told me she was taking a writing class at a local university here. It's called Sarah Lawrence College. It's not far from my house. Mm-hmm. And she said, come with me. And I thought like, all right, go with you. I've been writing for 20 something years. I don't need to take writing classes. And she said, no, let's see what it's like. And we went, and it really changed my whole life.
I love it when those stories where, you just on a whim try to do something and then it just takes your life in a whole new direction. Yeah. That's neat. Did you always think in the back of your mind someday you'd like to be a writer, or is that really a new thing that just fell in your lap?
I think it was a little bit of a fantasy, like the kind you have when you're like sleeping, you're dreaming about something and you wake up and you're like, I wrote a book. But, it was not like a conscious thing at all for me. And, and I knew, there people always laugh because there are so many ex-lawyers writing books, and there are. And, there was a woman in my law school class who she lasted, I think, a year and a half. And then she said, like, this was not for me. Like, she went out and she wrote, she had a book published. By the time we graduated, she was already having a book published. And, I was not like that at all. Like, I did not have in my head that I was going to be writing novels or, really, as you say, I just kind of stumbled into it in some ways. So.
If I remember the chronology right here, you wrote the thrillers first before?
I wrote one first, and then the middle grade, and then the other one. So the first one I wrote kind of right after I quit my job, and it's very heavily influenced by what my job was, who the people were, what the cases were. I don't want to say it's autobiographical because it's not really, but it does have a lot of me in it.
Sure. So if we want to get an idea of what your job was like, that would be a good one. Good one. What was it called again?
It's called Unreasonable Doubts.
Unreasonable Doubts. Okay. So then you wrote My Name is Layla, which is the book I mainly want to talk about today because it's just a powerful story, I thought. What inspired you to write My Name is Layla?
So I had finished the first book. I didn't know if I had another book in me because the first book was so kind of fraught with emotions of how I had left my job and all these things. And I wasn't sure that there was really another thing to be done after that. And once again, a friend told me she was taking a class on writing for children, and she said I should come. And I went, and I really had no idea what I was going to write. But I find with these classes that when you have, this works for me, I don't know if it worked for anybody else, but when you have a deadline and also you've paid money for it, that's very motivating for me. Yeah. So like I was not going to come into that class without my pages each week for the other people to read because that's what I was supposed to be doing. And I really basically wrote a chapter a week for 2 semesters. And by the time I was done, I had, not a bad draft of Layla. And I didn't really have, as I say, any big idea of what I wanted to do going in. What I had in the back of my mind was trying to come up with some kind of situation where the young protagonist would have a level of frustration that she might act out in a way that would be inappropriate. I had represented kids as juvenile delinquents as a law guardian years before, and I had very much that sense of, what drives a kid to do this. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when I started.
Mm. Now, do you have personal experience with dyslexia, or?
I don't have personal experience. I just really did some research. So,
sure.
And I try to make clear, because I've been speaking with organizations and schools, and I try to make clear that I'm no expert on anything. I just really kind of researched enough, I think, to make it a credible portrayal.
I guess then follow up, then without that personal connection, what led you to write about it?
It made sense to the character. I guess for me, 2 things kind of were interesting to me about dyslexia. First of all, was that it's so common. Like you don't really even think about how common it is, but it's something like 20% of the population suffers from dyslexia, which is a huge number. Right. And to me, to kind of have something almost hiding in plain sight, that's kind of the way I think about it. Like all these people might have it, and a lot of people may be getting help for it, and that's great. But a lot of people are not getting help for it. And kind of the level of frustration and, kind of attendant circumstances that can go with that. There's in the book, there's bullying, and there's kind of some social isolation, and there's feeling displaced in her own family because her brother doesn't have, these issues, and she does. So I just thought that there were a lot of issues around dyslexia that were interesting. And obviously, as a person who does love to read, and a person who, was really thriving as a student at that age, when these kids are not thriving as students, I found that really something interesting to explore.
One of my nieces has dyslexia, and she's had to work through that and has worked really hard through it. But, she's able to, to read, and she's able to and write and all that. So what I really appreciated about the book is it kind of helped us understand someone like me who can, read 1 million pages a year or whatever,
Right.
Never had a struggle with that. It really helped me understand what that struggle could be like. And
Right.
it was really insightful and eye-opening for
Thank
me,
you.
for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I thought, the other kind of big point I was trying to get out of it a little bit was that, everybody has something, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's just, you don't know, like you're talking to somebody and maybe they have a parent who's unemployed at home, or maybe they have someone dealing with some other chronic illness or a mental illness, or, there's just so much out there, and there's so much opportunity to have a kind relationship with somebody because you don't know what they're going through. And these kids around her, some of them did, obviously she had friends, and she has the boy next door, and there are people who are willing to be kind, but until you hit upon those people, it can be very lonely and very frustrating. And and even her mom, who is so well-meaning, she's just so bogged down in keeping the family afloat that she doesn't even recognize what's going on. So so just I'm hoping that maybe a little empathy kind of comes out.
And this book is not just, like you said, about dyslexia. That's one of her major problems, but she's dealing with, not knowing who her father is really. She's dealing with being in 8th grade, which is a turmoil of emotions. So, I have one at home. I know exactly what that's like.
Yeah.
I just reading this and I'm like, yep. I recognize that. But I'd say partway towards the end of the book, there's an event that happens that she kind of acts out at school and potentially could have gotten herself into some pretty big trouble. Anyway, all that to say, what I appreciate about this book is that as you explore these issues, that hopefully it'll normalize the discussion around these issues like dyslexia and mental health. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm looking forward to giving this to my daughter to read. Because it's the things that she's dealing with in school right now with her friends and everyone. Just as my son said about his graduating class last year, he's like, yeah, mentally we're all messed up. Yeah. It's been a hard year.
Oh, because it manifests in so many ways, right? Like, you think at this age, all the eating disorder issues. I mean, there's just huge things going on that people need to focus on. But.
Right. So I get minor spoilers for the ending, but not really. But, towards the end, when she realizes and realizes it's okay, that I learned differently. I learned slowly, and everyone learns in a different way, in a different style. And that's okay.
Right.
That to me, it seems like the challenge then is to find out what way works for you.
For sure.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I know in New York now, they're having a huge new initiative to, try to test for dyslexia earlier, because obviously the earlier you get to it, the better chance you have of kind of having these kids not have to struggle for so long. And, it is, as you said, it's tough. It's not a quick fix. There's no, okay, now we know you're dyslexic. Now everything is great. But,
Right.
But until you discover it, until you come up with it, then you, as a diagnosis, then you're kind of really at a loss. So,
it's that process of figuring it out, and then when you figure it out, and it's like a light bulb comes on half the time. It's like, okay, this is how, and this is okay. I try to encourage people that, I tell them about my YouTube channel, and they're like, well, I'm not really that big of a reader, and that's okay. That's okay. Not everyone is or can be, but there's a lot of different ways even to tell a story, not just with words on a page. I've seen powerful storytelling in musicians and dancers and public speakers, just many ways to tell a story. As I like to say, and explore the idea that words have power. I mean, our words do. And yeah, find what way works for you and run with it.
Yeah.
In all of this, in all your study and research, do you have any tips or guidelines to help someone either who might have dyslexia or maybe has a child with it and they're struggling?
Yeah, as I say, I don't want to, pretend to know more than I know. I guess what I did discover is that there are so many things that go on around dyslexia, so that even if you don't know exactly what problem your child is having, if there are social issues or if there are acting out issues, even, as I said, eating issues. I mean, there are so many things that could be going on around it that where the dyslexia is actually at the center and you don't know it, because that you can just imagine not being able to read when you're in school. How are you supposed to function that way? And even in Layla, she can read. It's not that she can't entirely read, but she's reading at such a slower pace that she's falling behind and everything. So I guess it's easy for me to say, be aware of your children, try to stay on top of things. I mean, that it's not always easy and it's not always doable, but you would hope also that the teachers are focused. And I know in some schools maybe more so than others.
The school our kids go to is a wonderful school district and is a really genuinely invested teachers that I just so appreciate. They actually reminded me of the teacher in your book. Her English teacher.
Yes.
His name escapes me right now.
Mr. McCarthy.
Yes, Mr. McCarthy. But yeah, that character especially rang true to me because I'm like, yeah, my kids have this teacher in their school that invests in them, that encourages them, that gives them opportunities, that realizes hey, they're maybe struggling in this area, just to let us know that, and how can we help, and just really we're very blessed. I'm very grateful to have such teachers. And I got thinking about teachers in my life who encouraged me and taught me, and I'm so thankful for them. So, any teachers out there listening or watching this, thank you for the work you do, for sure. Was there a teacher in your life that really inspired you?
I think I had a lot of teachers that inspired me. I had a high school chemistry teacher who very much was a proponent of girls being interested in science. And that was a primary interest of mine when I was a kid. And she encouraged me I did a summer program out in California, which was like a huge thing for me to go out there and work in a lab for a summer. And in the end, I didn't end up, pursuing science, but, just to know that there was someone that believed in me and that thought I could do it and wasn't just talking to the boys in the class. And, that was a big deal for me. But there were all sorts of, teachers. I had a wonderful orchestra teacher. I played the violin for many years, and I was really a terrible violinist, but he, he was so into it, and he thought I was great, and I thought he was great. And, that's all that mattered. So,
yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. I was thinking, I was probably in 7th or 8th grade. There was an English teacher of mine that really gave me a love for reading and encouraged me to write in different things. I think at the time I had visions of being an author one day, and, tastes change and plans change and all that, but that's certainly not off the table. Yeah. As you can testify, right?
For sure. It's never too late.
That's right. Never too late. But, I am so thankful especially for the people in my life who encouraged me to read and to see that as important. My boys were both avid readers. They still are. My daughter, we were a little concerned at first because, between my wife and my 2 boys, we just were like always with our nose in a book. And then she wasn't really like that. And then she begins to think, well, maybe there's something wrong with me because I don't like to read as much. And I'm like, no, it's fine. What we do is kind of abnormal anyway. No, but and like she just recently had one of the testing at school, and her reading level is like 10th grade or something. So I said, see, you're fine. It's just, you you just got to find what interests you and do that and go for it. So one of the other things I wanted to bring out about your book is even in the title itself, My Name is Layla, is that through the book, you know, they call her by a nickname, and that's kind of how she identifies. But then again, towards the end, she begins to realize and claim her identity. And I found that moment to be a very powerful one. Your website said that your books have a kind of a feminist influence to it, or a flavor to it. I don't know what the right phrase would be, but I guess anything you want to talk about that, about just her journey to claim her identity.
I think for her, you know, part of it was just being confident and proud of herself, like you were just saying about your daughter. But the big thing with her name is that the nickname that she was going by was given to her by her mother and her brother, kind of to avoid the name that had been given to her by her father. The father had come up with Layla. He was a big Clapton fan. And then he kind of walked out on the family. And the brother and the mother just didn't like to hear it. They didn't like to be reminded all the time by calling her Layla. And then by the end, you know, again, no spoilers, but she, you know, when she does have some reconnection with her father, she says, you know what, this is my name. This is who I am. And, you know, it's a beautiful name. And everyone has always told her it's a beautiful name, but she couldn't hear it that way because it was being, you know, cast doubts upon it by, you know, the other people close to her. So, you know, I think it was more a way of, as you say, just kind of reclaiming her identity and saying, you know, this is who I am, and I'm proud of it, and I'm moving forward. And also, you know, it has that little piece that part of dyslexia is that it is often genetic, and it's often handed down. And she finds out in the end that, you know, her father also suffered from it. So, you know, it's a little bit of a connection to him also, you know, saying, now I understand where this came from. It's not a terrible thing I've inherited. It's just part of who I am, part of who he is. And, you know, kind of connects her to him.
Like I said, this is a story that has a lot of elements to it. We've got, you know, family drama, personal struggles, finding your identity, finding out who you are. It's such a powerful little book, and it's marketed for middle grade, young adult age, but you know, I enjoyed reading it. It was a good read. I'd highly recommend that, and I'm looking forward to checking out your legal thrillers too.
Thank you.
I do love a good courtroom drama. So, well,
okay. You'll let me know what you think.
All right. So, what's next for you? What are your future plans?
I've been working on a new novel. It's going very slowly. I found working through COVID really almost impossible. There was a large stretch of time where I had everybody home here, which was wonderful and unexpected. And, you know, I have adult children. I wasn't, you know, didn't ever think we'd spend that kind of time all together in the house again, but it made working not possible for me. And my husband is still largely at home, and I haven't really seemed to have gone back to the office yet. So I'm just working very slowly, but it's an interesting, I think it's an interesting story. It's a mother-daughter story. There's no law in it, which kind of feels good at this point to kind of get away from it. It's more a psychological story, a family story.
Sure. So kind of used writing as some therapy to work out all your angst from law work, and now you're going on to other things, I suppose.
A little bit, trying.
Yeah. Your most recent book was another legal thriller? It's
not really a thriller. It's called Both Are True. It's about a woman who's a family court judge, and what happens to her, relationship, what she learns from her job. She's kind of controlling, and we try to get her out of that by the end of the book. So.
All right. That sounds great. Well, I guess the final question here is, if you had any words of advice to new writers that you found helpful, what would it be?
Just don't be afraid. Just give things a shot. I had no idea what I was doing, honestly. I mean, I could write. I knew how to write legal briefs, but I had no idea how to write a novel. And, you know, eventually it comes together. And if you just have to have a little faith and a little courage, and just don't give up on yourself.
Mm-hmm. Just jump in and try it. Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, where can folks find you online if they want to reach out or follow you?
So I have a website. It's just under ReynaMartyrGentin.com. The books are all up on Amazon. And yeah, if you just run my name, there's a lot of stuff comes up.
All right. Sounds great. Well, Reyna, thank you so much for spending a little time chatting and talking about your books. And folks, again, I recommend you run out and check out her work. It's good stuff. So Reyna, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.